My sister banned my disabled son from attending her wedding. Luckily, God had a plan for her. My sister and I have always been incredibly close with one another. So when she announced her wedding plans, I was thrilled and happy to help with any preparations. After getting her a wedding photographer, cake, and DJ, we got into the conversation on who to invite. Her husband was sitting there with us as we had the conversation. She was concerned about children coming to the event. According to her, they will cause havoc and make our wedding look bad. When I specifically mentioned bringing my amputee son, she hesitated. My son Jake was born healthy but lost his leg at 6 in a tragic car accident that also took my wife's life. Though he has overcome so much, he still battles low confidence at times. When I broke the news to my son, he was heartbroken. He always spoke about how much he loved seeing my sister and was sad that he couldn't see such an important milestone in her life. I ended up asking my best friend if there was any way he could watch my son. Thankfully, he agreed. When I first showed up at the wedding, I noticed a toddler standing next to an adult who I had never met before. Weird, I thought, but it was probably just an exception. As time went on and everyone began to congregate for the ceremony, I noticed that there were at least a dozen children there. I was confused, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I waited until my sister came over to me and I asked her what the deal was. She broke the news to me, and I was absolutely heartbroken. I don't know how I can look at her the same way again. She confessed that my son was excluded because he has an amputated leg. It would draw attention to him at the wedding, and the wedding is not about him. It's about me and my fiancée. Not only did I feel betrayed, but I was disappointed that my sister viewed my son in such a poor manner. I almost lost it. I could understand if he was going to be disruptive or something, but because of that? I didn't trust myself at that moment, so I just walked out and went home. When I got home, my son asked me why I was back so early, so I made up some excuse and then spent the rest of the day having fun with him because it was the only thing keeping me sane. When my sister said he couldn't come due to his amputated leg, I was shocked. I struggled to control my anger, simply walking out without a word. I arrived early back at my friend's place. He asked what was going on, so I pulled him into another room without my son and told him. His reaction was the same as mine. Once I was with Jake, I focused on making him laugh, the only thing soothing my rage. The next day, I messaged my sister, asking how she could exclude my son for something beyond his control. She broke down in tears, but stood by her decision, claiming he would draw attention. What she said made me sick to my stomach. Look at your son. I don't know how anyone could even raise that thing. Her ignorance towards what my son had been through blinded her sight of reasoning. For the time being, I ended up cutting off all contact from her. I was unwilling to expose my son to such cruelty. Eventually, I ended up disclosing the information to my son. To my surprise, he didn't even care. He revealed that this exclusion was the climax of years of cruel comments from my sister when she thought I couldn't hear. He would just tell me that he liked my sister in order to prevent any drama. Family. I was baffled by making such a smart decision, especially for only being 12 years old. My precious boy had experienced enough stigma. He didn't need it from his family. Anger and bitterness towards my sister festered inside me. Finally, I decided enough was enough. I realized that the rest of our family needed to know about my sister's cruel actions, not just to defend my son, but also to show them the person she truly was. It felt strange, conspiring against her like this, but my loyalty to my son came first. I began by talking to my parents about it. I could see the shock and disbelief in their eyes when they heard about the wedding incident and my sister's cold behavior. They had never imagined that their own daughter could be capable of such heartlessness. Soon, our cousins, aunts, uncles, and other relatives knew about it as well. The news spread like wildfire, and the reaction was unanimous. They all felt that my sister was wrong. The usual admiration and respect for her quickly turned into shock, then to disappointment, then to anger. Many of our relatives chose to distance themselves from her. Some confronted her about her actions, demanding answers, which she failed to provide convincingly. My parents, however, were the most ruthless. Being wealthy, they assisted in financially assisting my sister and me throughout adulthood. We both would receive a couple thousand a month from them. After they heard what I told them, they immediately stopped the automatic payments to her account and ended up taking her out of the will. She was cornered, and the weight of her actions came crashing down on her. She ended up calling me, crying, and apologizing for her insensitivity. She even wanted to apologize to Jake. But I was firm in my decision. Jake didn't need an apology from a person who viewed him as a lesser being. All he needed was love and acceptance, something that my sister had utterly failed to provide. A few years later, I found out from one of our family members that hadn't cut off my sister that she now had a kid. Based on the photo he showed me, her son had deformed arms that were barely protruding out of his torso. As bad as I feel for her poor kid, that is exactly what you call karma. What's the saddest thing someone told you before dying? My wife's Japanese grandfather was a brilliant man and a highly respected physicist in his day. Now in his 80s, he was a wise and gentle soul. As his health declined, he began living with us. He did not speak English at all, but I thought his quiet, calming presence would not be a burden to my wife as she cared for our 3 young children at home. It was just another mouth to feed, so I agreed to have him live out his last years with us. When he moved in, he chose certain daily chores for himself. He opened the curtains every morning and closed them every evening. He kept the entryway clean and straightened the shoes. He swept the crumbs from under the dining table after every meal. But most of all, he insisted on greeting me at the top of the stairs every day after work. He would take my arm and lead me to the dining table where he had set out tea for us to drink. He would talk about his day in Japanese. I always loved hearing his voice, even though I had no clue what he was saying. Then it was my turn to unburden myself with the cares of the day. We finished our tea and I felt deeply refreshed and ready to engage with my wife and children. At first, I thought I was humoring him because he was lonely, but, over time, I realized that he was doing it for me. He was helping around the house in order to make my life easier. I would be able to unwind from my hectic day, better enabling me to enjoy and connect with my family. Then all of a sudden his health took a dramatic turn for the worse. He started becoming weak and frail, losing his appetite. Within a week, he could barely walk on his own. My wife and I cared for him as best we could at home, trying to make him comfortable. But his condition continued to deteriorate. One morning, he struggled to get out of bed. His breathing was labored and he seemed disoriented. His hand was pressed tightly against his chest and his breathing was labored as he leaned against the hallway. My wife called me from my dressing room as I was getting ready for work. She asked if she should call an ambulance. Her grandfather looked at her sharply and shouted, "No." He understood what she had said perfectly. Our eyes met and he nodded his head with finality. I knew he was dying. He didn't want to spend his final hours latched up to IVs and tubes. He wanted to die at home. My wife paced back and forth, wringing her hands. "We must do something. What can we do? Maybe I should call the paramedics and ask them." I answered, "If you call them, they will come." She continued, "What if they could help him? They could add months, or even years to his life? What if they can just ease his pain?" "That's not what he wants," I answered. "He has lived a full life. He's ready to die. He wants to pass it home with his family around him." "But, what if? What if? What if?" she stammered. Her body was shaking, her beautiful face twisted with doubt and anxiety. I thought of her and her love for her grandfather. I realized that if he died in our home that morning, she would always blame herself. She would never have closure on whether or not she could have done something more. I looked into his eyes. He looked downward and nodded his head without saying a word. Neither of us had spoken. I went to the telephone and called the paramedics. They arrived shortly afterward. Her grandfather was calm and assisted them as best he could getting up onto the gurney. He smiled at everyone, including me. I felt as though I had betrayed him and did not deserve his generous forgiveness. I had made a conscious choice in favor of my wife's tender conscience over his final wishes. I knew it was the only choice I could make, but it grieved me to make it. 45 minutes later, I arrived at the hospital. He was in the cold, sterile emergency room, surrounded by strangers, with tubes in his nose, needles in his arms, strange incomprehensible voices shouting urgent commands filling his ears, and bolts of electricity jolting his chest. It was where he initially didn't want to die. But seeing his daughter like that, he changed his mind. There was one point when I was the only person in the room with him. My wife and kids were out with the doctor. As I was sitting beside him on his bed, he said something to me. It was the first time I had ever heard him say a sentence in English. It was broken English, but I knew what he was trying to say. "Thank you for choosing my granddaughter. Cherish your time. Make it beautiful." He gave me a final nod. I don't think I needed to respond. In an instant, the monitor started beeping, and I was asked to leave the room. 5 minutes later, a doctor emerged and said he had passed. I turned and walked out into the parking lot and burst into tears. "Please, I ask that you cherish your life and enjoy what you have in front of you. Love your parents. Love yourself. Love everyone in your life. Love and appreciate the present moment, because you never know when it will be too late. Cherish your time. Make it beautiful." People who were forced into arranged marriages, what happened with you and your partner? She tried to cheat on me with her own brother, and it did not end well with both families. I'm from a middle-class family in South India. Though I got myself into a relationship at a very young age, I later realized my mistake and decided to concentrate on my career first. With tons of hard work and strong encouragement from my family, I completed college and got a well-paying job. My reward was being forced into an arranged marriage. I was invited to what was supposedly my cousin's wedding, but when I got there, I realized I was tricked. It was my own wedding. She never talked much, and always kept to herself. She was from a very conservative, traditional family, so I just thought it was her just being shy. But based on tears falling down her face, she was tricked as well. She cried the whole time we had a grand wedding. We went on a honeymoon to Singapore the same week. I had the most disastrous honeymoon in human history. She wasn't comfortable with me from our very first moment on the flight. She used the washroom almost a dozen times in our 7-hour flight. I assumed it might just be one of those days. Later in the evening, we checked into our room, had a quick bath, and went for dinner. Everything was normal, and it seemed like things were starting to settle down. We went back to our room and then there was a moment we both were sitting on the same bed. I was very much new to this and very much confused about how to proceed. Slowly I slid my hand on her shoulder, running over her neck from behind. I used my other hand to grab her foot. All of a sudden, she broke down into tears. I had no idea what was happening and what to do. I tried asking her what was wrong, but all I got was more and more sobs. Then I tried getting close to comfort her, but she pushed me back real hard and again started crying, louder this time. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I decided to let her sleep over it. I slept on the couch that night. The next morning, by the time I woke up, she wasn't in the room. I was panicking. I searched in the restaurants nearby and every public area near our hotel. I didn't know what to do. I came back to the hotel room and I was about to call her parents. As I was dialing, I heard a noise in the room and there she was, standing on the balcony. She was texting. I shouted at her, "Where the hell did you go?" I was worried. In response, all I could get back was, "That's none of your business." I had lost it. We ended up in a huge argument. She dramatically started breaking things in the hotel room. Out of nowhere, she started hurting herself with those broken glass pieces. She landed 4 scars on her left arm by the time I could reach her to stop. I called the hotel service for an ambulance and we took her to a small clinic nearby. She was fine and had no dangerous injuries. I talked to my parents, and we came back to India on the very next flight available. By the time we landed, my parents came to the city of my in-laws. I asked them to stay at a hotel. I dropped her at her home and went to the hotel in the same taxi. I explained everything to my parents and we decided to meet up with my in-laws in the evening. We just wanted to know what her problem was. Just when I was thinking things couldn't get any worse, this happened in the evening. She accused me of forcing her into doing it in bed, hurting her, and more things that I can't even explain. She tried using the scabs on her arms as evidence of me hurting her. I never imagined anyone was capable of saying such horrible things. I was speechless and didn't know what to say. I remained silent for the next 5 minutes trying to process that. While me and my parents were trying to put our side of the story, she started shouting, "Liar! Liar!" with huge sobs and tears. "I can't live with this monster. Please, Father, get me away from him." That's what she called me. A monster. I couldn't take it anymore. I realized, no matter what I did, she wouldn't accept me. I requested both our parents to settle this thing off, once and for all. After arguing for the next hour, we decided to end it with a divorce, peacefully. No police case was filed against me. In return, we had to give back their money. This was a heavy setback for my family. I was mentally and emotionally shaken by this incident. My parents and sister were with me all the time through my recovery. They know who I really am. Coming to her side of the story, she had a boyfriend, but her parents didn't agree with their marriage. He was in a lower social class, and his family wasn't financially stable. She was a divorced woman and no one would prefer to marry her. She was heartbroken. According to what I heard from my parents, they were told that she had run away with her brother and supposedly married him. We assumed it was her way of getting back at her parents for forcing her into marriage. Going for an arranged marriage is like a gamble with huge odds, and most of the time, the two people aren't compatible. It's not easy finding a partner that suits you best, so don't rush it. Get to know them properly and give yourselves enough time to tune into each other before getting married. And most importantly, don't let anybody else speed up the process of your relationship. Especially your parents. It's in your hands to give your partner a beautiful life. Don't give up on them too soon.
What single sentence destroyed your previous relationship? I said something so catastrophic that it turned both of us gay. I don't regret saying it, and I don't care what he thinks. It was my husband's friend's birthday party, and I was beyond drunk. One woman that I'm friendly with was annoyed with her husband, and made a playful joke. "Man. If they didn't get us off, why would we keep them?" She laughed, and so did everyone else, including her husband. I awkwardly laughed but I guess looked uncomfortable. She asked me what was up, and she pointed out that I made a weird face. I said, "I've just never had a climax before, so I guess I couldn't relate." Almost a dozen people looked at me when I said that. I began to grow incredibly embarrassed. It was super awkward. The wife didn't help. She made things worse. She asked, "Is everything okay down there?" I laughed, and then said, "Yeah, just have never had anyone try I guess." For the next 10 minutes, all my husband's friends took turns insulting him in various ways. Many women talked about how they'd never be married to someone who didn't get the job done. My husband made us leave early. When we got home he lectured me about how I humiliated him. I pointed out that she asked, and I have a tendency to be honest. He's been really upset the last several days, and he keeps saying he can't talk to his friends because they now think badly of him. I felt awful for hurting my husband's feelings and embarrassing him in front of his friends. The next morning, I apologized and told him that I loved him. I explained that I had been too honest and should have handled the situation differently. My husband didn't accept my apology. I could tell he was hurt, not to mention insecure. We would sleep in the same bed, yet refused to talk to one another or do anything. Anytime we would go out with his friends, it was certain he would be made fun of. One night ended up being his breaking point. He came home in tears, complaining that I did this to him. "You ruined my life. I hope you know that." We slept in separate rooms that night. The next day, he insisted on a divorce. We had never experienced problems this severe in our relationship, and this took me by surprise. Although I was hurt, I decided that if he couldn't handle my honesty, maybe it was best for both of us to part ways. After countless attempts with men on Tinder, I eventually gave up. I decided to switch teams. It was not long after the divorce that I met Natalie. She was a yoga instructor in the local gym. I never had an interest in yoga before, but Natalie's vibrant energy drew me in. She was understanding, gentle, and cared about my well-being. We quickly became friends, spending time together outside the gym, and I found comfort in her companionship. Natalie was everything my ex-husband wasn't. She listened to my needs, both emotional and physical, without judgment or pressure. She was patient and attentive, always willing to try new things that would allow me to explore myself. She was gentle yet passionate, caring yet adventurous. One night, Natalie invited me to her house for dinner. The conversation flowed freely and the atmosphere was comforting. Over the course of the evening, we shared our deepest fears and dreams, bonded over our shared experiences, and talked openly about our desires. Later that night, Natalie asked me about my experiences, the kind I never had with my ex-husband. I felt embarrassed initially, but her comforting gaze reassured me. I confessed to her that I had never been able to climax with a partner before. Natalie looked at me with understanding eyes. "If you're comfortable with it," she said, "I want to help you discover yourself. But only if you're ready." With Natalie, I found a new kind of happiness. She was patient, always communicating and ensuring I was comfortable. Switching teams was the best decision I could have possibly made. Looking back, my ex-husband's inability to meet my needs was not the sole reason for our divorce, but it certainly played a part. Now, with Natalie, I found a partner who not only fulfilled my physical needs but also understood and respected me on a deeper level. The other night, I found out that my ex-husband was now dating men, based on his Facebook profile. Looks like he gave up and decided to switch teams too, but for a completely different reason.
People who were in the mafia, what's your story? I grew up dirt poor in Los Angeles. As a kid, I was heavily involved in martial arts, and by the time I was 20, I was doing amateur mixed martial arts and cage fighting. I held 2 black belts. I was also over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds of lean muscle. A lot of Asian guys came to the underground fights and they made money betting on me. They would buy me drinks and ask me to hang out with them. They were members of the Asian Boys gang, which at the time in LA was the last gang you wanted to mess with. Eventually, one of them brought a Russian friend of his and offered me a job as a bouncer in a Russian-owned nightclub in LA called Spunday. It was rave-style trance music full of all walks of life. It didn't take me long to figure out that the Russian dudes who ran the place were Russian mafia. They had some sort of partnership with the Asian boys who handled their muscle and ran the X-trade. As I asked questions, it piqued my interest. And within a few months, I was dealing it. After about a month of doing so, the Asian boys came to me and explained that I was dealing on their turf. It wasn't an argument or anything. They were actually really respectful but told me that they can't tolerate me dealing in the club. They insisted it was their market. Then I made a stupid decision. I decided to make a deal with them. "Look, I kick your guys out all the time for dealing in here. And the cops come in a lot. How about you sell to me and I'll push it for you in the club? I can move more than your guys, plus I know when the cops are around." Surprisingly, they ended up liking the idea. I was Irish, so there was no way they were going to recruit me into the Asian boys. Nevertheless, they treated me like one of their own. I went to all of their house parties, they provided me with an endless stream of Asian girls. My life was great. That is until I was confronted by a Latino gang member. As a bouncer, I had to get violent with a lot of people. And that slowly turned into getting violent with people who I comped and owed me money. And same went for my competition. I was confronted by a Latino gang member who had a problem with me for no reason. He made threats to me and spoke badly about me on the street. Everything was going downhill for me. It wasn't long until the Russians and the Asian boys sat me down and basically set ground rules. "Look, you have to handle this. If the police find out about our operation, then that's going to attract a lot of attention. We can't let this happen. If it does, it'll be your problem." We already knew there was a gang task force on the Asian boys and that undercovers were coming into the club. I started using mules to do my deals so I could insulate myself. And they ended up doubling business. Finally, a Latino gangster came to the club and got caught with a gun that he was trying to get into the club. He went to jail that night, and while in county, someone ended his life. It wasn't me, and no one I know had anything to do with it. But the Russians and the Asian boys thought I did. And it wouldn't be long until the Latinos thought so as well. It was bound to happen. I let them think that I had it done because I didn't know what else to do. But I didn't say a word. That ended up gaining me a lot of credit, and a lot of business opportunities came my way. All illegal, of course. But in the minds of the Asian boys and the Russians, I was confirmed as one of them. I started up a business that moved parts between factories during various stages of production. I was only 24 and making about $20,000 a month. One of the factories was of course owned by a Russian dude. He had a scam going to launder money through his joint by falsifying parts that never existed to justify money transfers. One day, I got sent for by the Russians. They wanted me to meet them at one of the clubs in the middle of the day, which was unusual. I was scared. But for the most part, I made money and I wasn't an idiot. So I knew they had no reason to harm me. When I got there was my main boss and 3 other guys I didn't know. They were all Italian. They were members of Ndrangheta. It was the Italian mafia in Europe. They were hooked up with New York mafia and wanted an X-connection. According to them, their original source ran out, and they wanted a new one. I didn't want to become their source for 2 reasons. First, if their original source had run out, then that meant they had punished them. Second, I was afraid I would be getting into something that I couldn't get out of. I told them to wait a few days while I set something up. Here I was, now a 25-year-old kid, sitting across from real mafioso in their 40s and 50s. I went to the Asian boys and asked them how much more X they could get me. I was dealing about 500 pills a week already. They told me they were maxed out and that it was getting harder to move. I knew it came from China and up through Mexico. I told them that if they can up it to 5,000 pills a week, I knew someone who could move it for them. They wanted proof, so they gave me the 5,000 pills on loan. I went back to the Italians and sold it to them for $50,000, which they could easily double their money on. I went back to the Asian boys and gave them the 50,000. No profit for myself. They were ecstatic. They ended up showing me their whole operation that supplied several US cities. Vegas, Salt Lake City, LA, San Diego, Miami, etc. They never wanted to tell me how big they were before. But now that I moved that much for them, I was in. I was a part of their team. I went back to the Italians and they said they could move those pills in New York in less than a week. They asked me for 40,000 pills. That was a huge stretch, I thought, so I told them I would have to see. I went back to the Asian boys, and to my surprise, they changed their tune. They were more aggressive than usual. I was beginning to think they were getting jealous. It seemed like they wanted this deal with the Italians instead of having me as the middleman. I decided to lie to them. I told them that I found out there was a detective who made me and one of my customers testify to me. I made up a person and said she was one of my customers, and after getting arrested she disappeared on me. They totally bought it. I said that she got out of jail and the next day her apartment was empty. Everyone agreed that it sounded like she went into protective custody. I told them that I didn't want to do business with them anymore because I was afraid all of us would get busted. But I told them that I would hook them up with my connection who wanted the 5,000 pills and that they wanted to move a lot more. They saw the logic in what I was saying. By removing myself as the middleman, they would be able to expand and drop whatever heat I had on me. Of course, they told me that we were friends, but they reminded me that if I walked away after they let me and I ended up flipping, they would murder my entire family. A minute later, someone came back with a bottle of scotch and poured shots for everyone. After taking a shot, my hair started standing up on the back of my neck. I had a feeling they were going to murder me. But we drank and everything seemed fine. We all hugged. A few days later, myself, the Italians, and the Asian boys sat down in a steakhouse and I introduced everyone. Everyone just talked sports, politics, the news, or whatever. No business. Just introductions. I knew to do this because it was the Omerta way. Italian La Cosa Nostra does it that way, and it is considered off limits to discuss business over dinner. One guy named Furio walked me outside to talk. He wanted to know if I was getting a piece of the deal or if the Asian boys were muscling in on me. I told him that I am not the type to be muscled. I said that I will go after families as quickly as they would. It was a line of BS because I never murdered anyone and I didn't intend to. But I knew I couldn't start stuff by accusing the Asian boys of muscling me, and I couldn't come off like a coward. I told Furio that I worked for the Russians. I said the Asian boys didn't have a beef with me and didn't want one with the Russians. He had me follow him out to his car so he could give me something. I was scared. He opened up his truck and I pictured myself getting thrown in. I turned my body as if expecting someone to come up behind me. Furio sees this and laughs. "You watch too many movies," he said. Instead, he pulled out a velvet bag and handed it to me. "That's for you for tonight." I walked out to my car without looking at it. I didn't want to look at it in front of him for some reason. He got in his car and drove off. I opened the bag in my car and saw it was a 2-pound gold bar. Worth about $15,000 at the time. Maybe $45,000 now. I still have it to this day. I had a nest egg of about 6 figures saved up and I left town for a suburb. I ended up getting a few jobs in security and was glad to be out of that life. But 6 months later, my old life came back to me. I ran into one of the Asian boys who was coming out of a restaurant as I walked in. It was odd seeing him in the suburbs and I was suspicious. I was with a girl who was pretty hot and he checked her out. I told her to go inside and get us a table. Asian boy just complimented me and we caught up for a minute. He laughed and asked, "So did you change your name or what?" I was relieved because I knew that he figured I had gone on the run to avoid getting arrested. I told him that I was going by a different name and just laying low. I told him that I didn't know if I could get back in or not. He told me that I shouldn't. He shocked me when he said that no one can do it forever. He said he would get out, but he needed the money. We exchanged numbers and that was it. I never saw him again. About a year later, 2 things happened that changed my life. I saw on the news that LA conducted a huge bust and took down the Asian boys. I saw guys I knew being led in cuffs. I took it as it meant that I was officially out of that life forever. Which was my intention. I later found out that one of the mafioso was a DEA agent. It couldn't have been Furio because he gave me gold. A DEA agent would not have done that. It turned out that the Russian I worked for was pinched for something and agreed to give up the largest X-ring in LA in exchange for immunity. The Russians are pretty wily like that. They won't give up each other, but they will sell out a partner any day. I was fearful that my initial deal with them would mean they would come after me and arrest me next. They never did. I eventually figured that I was perceived as a carrier rather than a dealer. The next thing that happened that changed my life was 9/11 that same year. I felt that I wanted to do something with meaning and leave criminal activity behind completely. I was pissed that the USA was attacked, so I joined the military. 18 years later, I'm out of the military and own my own legit business. And I don't touch substances. What was the most disturbing thing you found your partner doing? I've always been suspicious of my girlfriend's ability to stay calm, even in heated arguments. She never seems to get upset or anything. Well, last night I found out how she deals with her pent-up anger, and it was horrifying. That night, we were talking about the recent submarine events, and we both had different opinions on the matter. Anyway, I thought it was lighthearted because of how she always spoke calmly and even laughed at some points. That was until she got up, and just ended it with, "You know what? Don't talk to me." I tried to tell her it doesn't matter, but she kept cutting me off, going, yeah. Basically telling me to shut up. So, here I am feeling like crap. I wake up in the middle of the night, and she's not in our bed. Whatever, I don't control her, right? Then, I heard the door of the bathroom open, so I figured she just went to the toilet. I feel gross detailing this out, but whatever. I could hear her pee hitting the bowl, but I didn't hear her flush. Instead, she opened the door, and I heard her walk away. I was slightly worried, and I needed to use the bathroom anyway, so I got up to see what was going on. What I saw truly horrified me in ways I'm still not capable of completely explaining. I walked out to see her in the living room, holding one of the food containers that had some leftovers. Next to her was a glass, filled with a yellow liquid. I could instantly distinguish it by its looks and stench. What she did next nearly made me throw up then and there. She poured the glass into the food. I immediately screamed at her, demanding to know what the hell she thought she was doing. She had a deer caught in headlight look on her face, and flinched, causing them to go everywhere. I kept screaming at her, and she started crying, saying she's sorry over and over. I told her I demand an explanation, or she was free to call her mom and leave. Apparently, the reason she's always so calm and happy the morning after arguments where she gets mad, is because she does this. She drinks a whole lot of water, and in the night when I sleep, she goes and pours it in food. Apparently this started with simply pouring it on my belongings. I was disgusted. I screamed at her some more and I don't even feel guilty that she cried. I told her to get out of my house, or I'm calling the police. She tried to beg but eventually left. I sent her a message to get someone to get her stuff, that were over and blocked her. I don't even know what to say. I feel violated, and disgusted. The fact she knew what she was doing, watched me eat it, and never felt guilty. Even the thought of it makes me want to throw up.
Children of abusive parents, did you ever hit them back? I did more than just that. For most of my childhood, I had always assumed that your parents hitting you as punishment was just the norm. I never thought anything of it. But as I got older, my friends at school would often call out bruises or marks on my body. When I told them how I got hurt, they were horrified. I ended up calling out my parents for their behavior. Needless to say, it only made things worse. When I was a teenager, I was at my breaking point. I came home from school one day and went to my room to change and start my homework. I had reports to do and tests to study for. I was home for less than 15 minutes when I heard my mom screaming for me to get into the kitchen. My husband was an officer. She had thrown a luncheon for several of the officers' wives. She demanded that I clean the mess up so she could fix dinner. Mind you, I hadn't been home since 6:30 that morning. At that time, it was around 4 p.m. The dishes stacked on the kitchen table, in the sink, and over all the counters had sat for several hours as had the mess she made preparing the luncheon. I walked into the kitchen and immediately got the sharp-pointed finger poking me in the chest as she screeched at me about ignoring the mess to hang out in my room, neglecting my responsibilities. I tried to explain about the reports and tests, but she screamed at me. She had a wooden spoon in her hand. She began to raise it at me, but I backed away and put my hands up. I was in a position where my homework and studying could wait. According to her, it always had to wait until whatever she wanted done got done. You ought to be thankful I had a roof over my head and food to eat. Then she hauled back her hand to slap my face. I don't know what sparked in me, but I wasn't going to take this slap. Not this one. I was sick and tired of how my mother was treating me, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. For the first time in my entire life, I blocked the slap. I simply knocked the hand aside. That made her even angrier. I saw the rage in her eyes. I had ignited something in her that I never had before. Instead of slapping me again, she took it a step further. She came at me with her fingernails, scraping my face and tearing at my eyes. I took one of her arms by the wrist and twisted the arm away from my face, and she started yelling, "You're assaulting me." When her other hand came toward me in a fist, I grabbed her fist and started to squeeze as hard as I could. Then I sort of wriggled the fist so I could feel the bones, something my older brothers had told me about. I didn't break her hand, but I did hurt her. She jerked back and got a slap in. I slapped her right back. But as I had slapped my mother, my dad had walked through the door. He had come home from work. She, of course, put on the waterworks about how I had attacked her when all she had done was ask me to help. Dad looked at me and my bloody face from her sharp nails and told Mom to go to the other room while he spoke to me. I explained to him about my homework, the short deadlines for the reports, the tests that got sprung on me, and how I came home to Mom having thrown a party and left the entire mess for me. My mom was yelling from the other room that she was never going to feed me again. So, my dad took me out for some fast food. Then he told me to go to my room for the rest of the night. Mom wasn't happy when she smelled the fast food on me. Nor was she happy when she figured I wasn't cleaning the kitchen before being sent to my room. She then decided that she would leave everything for me to do in the morning before I walked to school. Dad told her no. My dad gave her a threat. If she forced me to clean the dishes, he would tell all the other officers to tell their wives to never accept an invite from her. She asked, "Then who's going to clean up the mess?" "Someone has to do it." He told her it was her mess. "Deal with it yourself." This made my mom furious. She had been hurting me my whole life, but it looked like her eyes were going to pop out. She looked my father in the eye, took a slow deep breath, and opened up a drawer nearby. That was where we kept the gun. My mom tried reaching for the gun, but my dad knew exactly what was going on. He was a police officer. She managed to get the gun in her hands. My father tackled her to the ground, causing the gun to slide on the floor. My mother tried reaching for the gun. This is when my father called for me. "Grab the pistol." He was struggling to hold Mom down. When I ran over to kick it away, my mom grabbed my leg and yanked me to the ground. All three of us were on the floor now. With the gun kicked away, I held my mom's head down as my father handcuffed her. We had an officer on duty come by and take my mom to jail. It's been years since then. I've tried to cut off all my ties with her, but it hasn't been easy. Ever since she's been released, she has managed to find my new home. I'd like to say my mom never tried to hit me again, but I would be lying. I was an adult with my own kids the last time she tried. But that was the last time she made contact, because every other time I would grab her wrist and ask her if she wanted to be treated the same way as I did before. I wasn't going to stand and take it any longer. Since then, my father obviously divorced my mother, and I still keep in touch with my father and his side of the family. I have my own kids too. I have broken the cycle of abuse in my family. I couldn't be more proud of myself, but I have to owe it to my father. I thanked him for having my back dozens of times, but he insists that he was just being a father. I remember when he said, "The only thing that I really care about is that you're safe and healthy." I'm so happy that I am able to see my baby girl live a great life. That made my heart melt. I love those who were bullied as kids. Where are your bullies now? When I was in elementary school, I had a bully, Aya. It all started in the first grade. She was an instant popular girl because she talked about her time in Ghana. She was born and raised there up until she was 4 years old when her parents immigrated to America. I thought that was so cool because the only immigrants I have ever known were from Mexico since we lived in Texas. I asked her what life was like in Africa. She looked at me and said in a very smug voice, "A lot better than Mexico." I thought that was weird, but I let it go because we were kids at the time and I think she just wanted to be cool or something. As the year went on, she always made offhanded comments about me being Mexican, and it was always directed towards me. It wasn't until the second grade when we were just learning this brand new word that we have never heard of before, racism. 7-year-old me at the time vaguely understood it because my mom taught me the words that were derogatory towards us and wanted me to be aware of them. Anyway, we were watching a cartoon about Martin Luther King Jr. and we were at a scene where the protesters were being unjustly arrested. I thought it was cruel and didn't think it was fair. Aya looked at me and shouted, "A beaner," like you would never understand. For those who don't know, the word beaner is a slur against Latin people. Sure, it's not as disgusting as the N-word, but it is a disgusting word to people like me. I was horrified at being called that in the middle of class, and I looked at my teacher, who just shrugged her shoulders and went back to the show. I couldn't believe it. We're learning about the civil rights movement and I was called a racial slur in front of everyone. I tried asking my teacher why she didn't say anything, but all she said was, "It's just a word, sticks and stones." I ran home in tears and told my mom everything. She was upset at first, but at the time she told me that Aya probably didn't know that word was. How wrong my mother was. For the next 4 years, Aya would throw racial slurs at me, calling me a beaner who eats nothing but beans or a wetback because I must have crossed the Rio Grande River. I begged her every single time to stop, and I went to my teachers pleading with them for help, but they never did anything. She would also insult me for the way I looked, the way my hair was, and how I was bigger compared to other girls. Things got worse in the 4th grade. I was going through a rough time because my mom was dating a man who drank beer as if prohibition ended. He also smoked heavily, and the smell would end up on my clothes, which added fuel for Aya's fire. Aya would always use me as an example about the dangers of smoking, pointing out how the smell was so bad that she constantly plugged her nose every time she walked by me. It led to rumors of me never taking a bath that followed me up until the end of 6th grade. At this time my mom realized Aya was a problem and tried contacting the school. All she would get was that it was just a disagreement between 2 classmates. She wrote notes for me to give to my teachers, but nothing would happen, and in the 5th grade things really took a bad toll. My grandfather passed away, and his death hurt me so much that even to this day I still feel that raw pain of his passing. Word got out to my school and Aya walked up to me saying how sorry she was that my grandfather was gone. I naively thought that maybe, just maybe, she would stop being a bully and say sorry for saying racist things towards me. Nope. It's sad that he died to get away from you. I would too if I realized my granddaughter was so ugly. I broke into tears while she and a few of her friends laughed. As always, none of my teachers did anything to stop her. I told my mom, who went to my teacher and demanded that she do something about it, or else she was going to go up there and make her stop. So for the first time in the whole year, my teacher walked up to Aya and told her to stop being so mean to me. Aya looked at her and burst into tears, crying that she was being so mean. "It's because I'm black, isn't it?" Immediately my stupid teacher backed off. Aya would go on to use that phrase every time any of our teachers even attempted to do something. This is when things made a turn for the worst. In 6th grade, I used to draw anime a lot. I wasn't any good, but I practiced every single day and slowly my skills were improving. I was drawing the main cast of Sailor Moon during my free period, and it was a decent first attempt, really. For once there were no stray pencil marks and I didn't have to erase as much. I left to go to the bathroom, and when I came back my drawing was ruined. It had pen marks everywhere with the words beaner and wetback and permanent marker all over it. I was devastated and broke down. I worked so hard on that drawing and it was vandalized with hate. I looked over to a group of desks where Aya was sitting and I saw her laughing. She and a couple of her girlfriends were saying how funny it was that I was crying over a stupid picture, and I saw that she had that stupid permanent marker on her desk. I marched up to her and yelled at her. I demanded to know why she hated me so much. I was crying and screaming when my teacher told both of us to go to the office. I thought we were finally going to solve the issue, but as always I was wrong. My principal looked at the both of us and said that I should apologize to Aya. "What?" I asked her. "Apologize to Aya for yelling at her. Just because you're upset over a drawing doesn't mean you have to yell at a classmate for it." But she ruined my drawing. She wrote slurs all over it, I argued back. I should point out that she even had permanent marker stains on her hands. Why aren't you telling her that you don't tolerate racism in this school? Why are you always taking her side? I asked. I'm not taking sides, young lady, but those are just words. Sticks and stones. That's when I realized that Aya was getting away with her racism and there was nothing I could do about it. I refused to apologize and the principal called my mom, who demanded that the principal do something about Aya, but nothing happened as always. After that incident, Aya was emboldened at the fact that she could get away with the bullying and made my life hell. She destroyed me. It was to the point where I could no longer draw again. Even to this day, if I try to draw a character I liked, I break into tears and just stop. My mom had tried everything. I developed a hatred towards my own ethnicity. I cried that I wished I was white because I hated being called those words, and I hated the way my face looked because I could see my Native American and Mexican features. She made me hate myself. The bullying only stopped after elementary school because she went to a different junior high school. Regardless, the damage of her bullying had been done. I had to go to therapy to get rid of the terrible things she said to me out of my head and slowly regain myself as a person. My family, who knew of the bullying, gathered around and gave me unconditional love and support, all the while telling me stories of our ancestors who started our family, and how they fled Spain during the Texas Revolution. I even went to the tribe I was descended from to help gain a better understanding of my indigenous roots, and they helped me immensely as well. Unfortunately, Aya and I ended up going to the same high school, but I avoided her like the plague because I wanted nothing to do with her or her BS. Aya was a model student, and during Black History Month, we used to have an assembly where we talked about the great black figures in history. She would always go on the podium and talk about how proud she was of her race and that we should embrace everyone of different race, religion, and all that good stuff. It took all of my willpower and constant reminding of myself that what happened in elementary school was in the past. I just thought she was a piece of work. Fast forward to 2021. I was reading a book on my phone when I got a notification from someone I hadn't seen since high school. It was Aya. Now, instead of feeling terrible anxiety, I just looked at it annoyed and wondered what the hell she wanted and opened it. Apparently she was hosting our elementary school reunion because the old building was being torn down in place of a new one. She was inviting everyone who went to school there so we could say goodbye to the old thing. I wanted to decline, but I thought to myself, that stupid school will be destroyed, why not spit on it or something? And then something sparked in my head. This could be my last chance to expose Aya for what she really was. Aya, the no-good racist who takes joy in other people's misery. And it wasn't just me she threw racial slurs at. She was like that to everyone. From the girl who was from Delhi to a Chinese student who ended up transferring to a different school because he couldn't take it anymore. So while having dinner with my mom, I asked her if she remembered the girl who used to bully me. She gripped her fork and said that she did remember and how much she hated that little waste of air. I asked her if she remembered going to the school many times to complain about her. She said yes, and that she had written down everything that was said. And knowing my mom, she never threw anything away because it was important documents. I decided to look into her old files and I found them. It contained the notes Mom took, the hateful messages Aya wrote to me, and even my Sailor Moon drawing that had those terrible racial slurs on it. The terrible feeling of self-hatred and sorrow came back in full. I was close to tears seeing that drawing and those notes. After calming myself down, I went to work. I printed copies of the notes along with a note from my principal which said it seems that Aya called her nasty words based on her ethnicity. It was even signed by that principal, which proved two things. Aya was a racist and the school knew but refused to do anything. The little party was basically a barbecue on the school playground. Most of the alumni were actually Aya's victims, but unlike me they ignored her when she would bully them. Looking around, I actually saw some known members of our local equal rights group. I assumed she invited them because Aya made a name for herself over the years since graduation. It almost made me feel sorry for what I was going to do. And when I mean almost, I mean never. The little barbecue went by smoothly and Aya was talking about the beautiful memories she had at our old school and that she was so thankful that they welcomed her with open arms because she was an immigrant from a faraway country and was worried of not being able to belong. I remembered how proud she was when she first walked in our class, no fear at all. After her passionate farewell speech, everyone in our class took turns saying their own farewells. When it was my turn, I looked around and saw everyone staring at me. Aya was standing there with a confident smile on her face as if she thought that I was so beaten down that I would just say whatever with the school and that's it. Nope. I talked about how I was so nervous going to the school because it was something new and I knew that it would lead me to a path of adulthood. I talked about how this damn school had brought nothing but nightmares and horrible teachers. I told them about a terrible student who bullied me so much that my poor mother had to spend thousands of dollars of her life savings just to give me therapy because I could not function well. I then looked at Aya and said that she was a prime example of the American dream. An immigrant who worked tirelessly to make it in this complicated country. I then said in the same smug tone of voice she had 20 years ago, "I am so glad you grew out of your racism." With that I stood up and left. As for the notes I compiled, I sent them to that local group anonymously and told them that their star volunteer was not who she was. I just thought that would be the end of it, but I did not know of the absolute storm I caused. Aya's reputation was destroyed. When the leader of the group saw the notes, he was livid. He immediately told her that she was no longer welcomed and said that she was a terrible example for the people they were helping. Her fiancé dumped her, she lost her job, and as it turns out, Her parents never knew of the bullying. I guess my principal decided that it wasn't worth calling them years ago. After sending my notes to the superintendent, my former principal apparently lost a special award she got for her contributions to our school district. He was just as livid. I got an apology from the school district along with other victims of Aya. Aya attempted to contact me soon after, demanding I apologize for ruining her life, but I just ignored her and blocked her. She had gotten what she deserved.